Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to join us for this webinar. We're excited to have you on the call with us today, and we hope you find this content valuable. A few housekeeping items before we get started. If you're experiencing any issues with your audio or the slides or my face starts to jump around on you, please do us a favor and reload that page in your browser to fix the majority of those problems. Also, all lines have been muted, but we still want to hear from you. Don't think we're ignoring you. Please use the Q&A window in your interface to ask us questions, and I promise we'll leave time at the end of the webinar to get your questions answered. Also, we've loaded some relevant material for you to download and take with you in the Resources tab of your interface. Finally, we'll be sending you a recording of this presentation sometime in tomorrow so that you can watch it again if you'd like, or send it on to your coworkers. And with that, let's get started. We're talking today about data sharing for state and local governments. Now, Snowflake has been in the data sharing business here for quite a while, but some of you may not be aware of some of our efforts in this area or others. So really fast, and I promise I'll keep the marketing stuff to an absolute minimum. Let's talk a little bit about Snowflake and how we're in this world. First of all, as a company, we're now listed on the New York Stock Exchange. If you missed that announcement, that was very exciting for the Snowflake business and the company in general. It's a huge valuation. We're very excited about the opportunity, but it shows really the promise that data sharing represents to our users and the consumers of our service. Forbes has listed us #1 on the Cloud 100 list for 2020, and we now have over 2,000 Snowflake employees all around the world. The solution in Snowflake, 7 of the Fortune 10 companies on the planet today are using Snowflake as part of their data strategy. Over 3,000 customers are currently using the service. And we have a Net Promoter Score of 71, which means quite a few of our customers would recommend Snowflake to a coworker of theirs, which is a huge endorsement. In fact, I think the best endorsement you can receive. And finally, the Snowflake ecosystem continues to grow. Snowflake is a phenomenal data platform, but we can't give you the ecosystem by ourselves. We depend upon our top partners like Salesforce.com, Deloitte, AWS, Google, Accenture, Microsoft, Talend, Matillion, Fivetran, Tableau, and ThoughtSpot to deliver, and over 1,000 others, to deliver top value and data services to all of our customers all over the world. Data is changing how state and local governments operate. This statement shouldn't be a surprise to anybody on our webinar here. There's always new ways to improve service delivery for residents using modern technologies like Snowflake. We talk a lot in the industry about data democratization and making data-driven decisions. The problem with trying to make those data-driven decisions, and the problem with trying to get to a point where you can, is that data really in and of itself is a raw resource. You've probably heard this a million times, that data is the new oil. And to a point, that's very true. Data is a raw resource. Refining that raw resource into something that is more informative, into something that is more beneficial to our agencies and our citizens, is the goal of every government IT office and every chief data officer and chief information officer. Getting to the point where we have the data literacy, not just at the agency level, but also as private citizens, to be more data-driven, to understand the information in front of us, and to take actions on that information is critical to our success as a nation. In this talk, we'll talk a little bit more about how we improve that service delivery, how we enable that data-driven technology push, and how we can make our citizens and our agencies and organizations more efficient. So what does it look like? What commonly does the ecosystem in our state and local governments look like? Or rather, what could it look like, perhaps? In the center, we have our municipal government, whether we're state or local agency, and that's the center of this wheel. That center of the wheel, that's making the decisions for us. It's guiding local policy, setting speed limits, or developing separation standards for social distancing. This is where the information really hits the road. And you may get a bunch of different data sources that they need to ingest in order to make the right decisions. For example, the Snowflake Star Schema database, which contains a abundance of information from Johns Hopkins University about the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, City Bike or projects similar to it might be providing data about mobility of the citizenry that we're focusing on. How are they able to move? How often are they leaving their houses? When they leave their houses, where do they go? What sort of things or services are they trying to get to or purchase? Other state government and hospitals and agencies might be providing information about personal protection equipment at hospitals, ICU beds that are available. We might be receiving information about food stores or oil reserves. The list goes on and on and on. And finally, other local agencies that are providing their own services to the citizenry might also share information about those services to that municipal government. And in the end, the desired goal is that this information comes together into a single place so that the best decisions possible can be made by that municipal government. We want to have all the information to bring everything together and make the right choice. And in Snowflake world, we sort of say this is a single source of truth. But it's a bit of shattered glass here, because we're not just talking about a single source of truth at the municipal government layer. We're talking about a single source of truth for the entire state and local government ecosystem. The local agencies, the hospitals, the state government officials, the City Bike feed-in or mobility feed-in, the health data coming from other sources like universities or research institutions. A single source of truth is not how I see my world. It's how my world is presented to me by those who know it best. I think it's important to keep that context as we continue to talk about why data sharing is so important to state and local governments. Here's a great example of sort of what I'm talking about. The state of California decided to power their COVID-19 response on Snowflake. It took weeks, not months, for California's officials to really wrap their heads around where the positions for PPE were, where their ICU beds were, and what the spread of COVID-19 looked like. The reason they were able to move that fast is because very flexible cloud-enabled and cloud-native platforms like Snowflake are able to move that fast. California is now running their entire response on Snowflake, keeping track of every resource they have available and keeping track, more importantly, of the problems to which they need to apply those resources. We have a quote here from the CTIO, Scott Gregory for California, and he says, the state of California's response to the COVID-19 emergency has been greatly enhanced by the ability to share, collaborate, and communicate data and information in new ways that are meaningful to health professionals and allied support entities during this crisis. I also want to mention, we'll talk a little bit about how Snowflake makes it easier for agencies to share information with citizens, but this is one decision that California also made. California shares the information about its COVID-19 response on its website and data portal, but also democratized that data using Snowflake's data marketplace, which is like a really great app store for data sets. We'll talk about that in just a couple of slides, but it's important as a takeaway that not only is California providing that information to other government agencies and to executives and decision makers, but they're also providing it back to us, which is really, I think, the most important part of the data sharing ecosystem. How do we make life better for everyone, not just the ones with the keys to the castle? So what is Snowflake? I've talked about it a couple of times. Why is it where we should be doing what we're talking about doing? Snowflake is a cloud data platform, and I know that sounds a lot like marketing fluff, and to a point it is, but we have the audacity to call ourselves a platform instead of a data warehouse because we built capabilities like data sharing natively into an infinitely scalable and elastic data warehouse in the cloud. The ability to build data pipelines, as you can see in some of these workload verticals, to build data pipelines natively inside of the Snowflake product means you lose the complexity in a typical data ecosystem. Studies have shown that 80% of a data scientist's time is spent moving data, arranging data, and refining data from the source to the consumer who needs it. That data democratization, 80% of that time is spent turning screws. If we can make that time better spent and shorten those timelines dramatically, we can add more value and make those decisions easier and better to make. So on the left in our diagram, you can see the typical sources that you might have in a data environment. For example, transactional databases, OLTP databases in this case, enterprise applications that might be feeding data into a warehouse, third-party imports if you get a FTP data share, or if you're in the Snowflake ecosystem, an incoming share from a partner organization. Maybe web and log data. For example, where are folks looking at a certain website from? If it's a COVID-19 data, maybe those websites are being accessed in Los Angeles or San Diego or San Francisco. That information could be relevant about public sentiment. And finally, IoT data, things like JSON, XML, Parquet, Avro. Snowflake handles these data types natively, stores it right alongside your structured data, and can help you do joins across that data just like you would with a bunch of Excel spreadsheets, only at a much larger scale and without ever running out of steam, regardless of how many users are clicking on Go at once. Snowflake is a software as a service offering. When you sign up for a Snowflake account, we don't hand you a machine image to install. Instead, we give you a URL. And that URL points to any of the major cloud vendors that we currently support. We run today on AWS, on Microsoft Azure, and on Google Cloud. You can access our services using that URL, and you know that your data is safe. We've built security into the product. Security is our #1 concern. Being a cloud data warehouse, we know the first time we have a breach is the last day we'll be in business. So your data is always encrypted at rest and in flight on Snowflake, regardless of the platform you choose to use. And in fact, you can't turn that off. In 2 regions, Snowflake has achieved FedRAMP moderate. So for data usage that needs 800-53 NIST compliance, we also have a solution for you, along with SOC 2 Type 2 reporting and PII and HIPAA and PCI data. So regardless of what data you're putting into Snowflake, it can all live in one place or in multiple places, because not only does Snowflake work in each of these clouds, we also work between all of those clouds. If you want to replicate from AWS to Azure, Snowflake can help you with that. If you want to do that between, say, Azure and GCP, we can also handle that requirement. For failover and failback purposes, Snowflake can help you run not just between regions of a certain cloud provider, but also between the cloud providers themselves, a unique capability based on our patented architecture. The 6 boxes across the top here are really workloads that we see a lot of customers apply Snowflake towards. So everything from data engineering, we mentioned data pipelines earlier, but data engineering really means taking data coming in from a source and refining it to a point where it's usable in a modeled format for my data consumers, whether it's Tableau analysis or whether it's ThoughtSpot doing some really cool AI stuff, or maybe Data Robot. Regardless of the tools that are used, the data must be conformed and it must be modeled in order to be usable. The data lake is the next example here, and that's really looking at that JSON or XML or Avro or Parquet and having a great place to store that. Now, I know you may already have a data lake, but the problem we see with most data lakes is they've become data swamps. They get overrun with governance problems and overrun with data integrity problems. It becomes difficult to decide who should see what data, who should have access to what, and how much code we have to write to really model and conform that data. Snowflake simplifies the entire stack by bringing that semi-structured and structured data together in a single platform with role-based access control and a full authentication stack based on SAML or OAuth. We allow you to very quickly implement this platform and govern the data that sits in your data lake with no other changes to the ecosystem. It sits in the same cloud. We can still integrate with all of your object storage down below, but provide that beneficial layer on top. Data warehousing is the space that we started in. Data warehousing is a typical RDBMS workload. Snowflake does this exceptionally well, with the big exception to most of our competitors and most other data warehouses in the legacy world. Snowflake uses object storage as our underlying data system. And because of that, we can enable as many compute resources to access a single source and a single data set at the same time without resource contention. The same exact benefits move over into the data science realm, where we're looking at things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. Snowflake allows ODBC and JDBC connections into its platform, as well as a dedicated Python library for working with things like Apache Spark and TensorFlow in Python. Data applications are built on Snowflake every single day. We have a long list of reference customers on our website, snowflake.com. You can check out all the companies that have built their data applications on top of Snowflake. And finally, on our data exchange, which we'll talk about here in just a couple of slides, you can access data sets that were published by some of our largest and most prominent customers. Anyone can be a data publisher on Snowflake. Think of it as a giant app store for data. So now that we have a platform that can do some data sharing, we have a platform upon which to build our data-driven decision making, what do we actually do? Well, everything in Snowflake is looked at as a provider and a consumer, at least as far as sharing is concerned. In this example, we're doing a one-to-one data share between myself, for example, and the Department of Transportation, or DOT and Department of Justice, for example. They may have a data set that they wish to share with another organization, and that share is a direct relationship. For example, Department of Transportation might want to consume all the folks' license plates that were pulled over last month for a DUI. The Department of Justice has that information and can take a subset of their data set that just encapsulates maybe the license plate and the date and time. They don't need to know the person who was driving. They don't need to know the driver's license number. All they need is the license plate and the date and time. That little subset of data can be carved out, permissions dynamically assigned, and that data authorized for that consumer. Now, the data hasn't moved. They didn't have to copy data and FTP it out to somebody else. The data didn't have to be extracted and loaded on a CD-ROM and then shipped through the mail. As soon as that data share is enabled, Snowflake in real time presents that consumer with a live real-time view of that data. But the data is always encrypted with the provider's keys, and the provider can remove access or change permissions at any time with an immediate effect. So if we suddenly determine that the license plate number needs to be hashed or that the date should be abstracted, well, that's easy. The DOJ only has to change the filter that's used to define that share, and the change is made. The Department of Transportation can no longer see that protected data. The data is always live, and it's always secure. It's always ready to use, and it doesn't require a manual copy or move statement. And in fact, if you're the consumer of that data, you're not paying for any storage in your Snowflake environment because you really are accessing that provider's data set live, but securely. Just as an example of what this might look like, this is a screenshot of a data exchange built on Snowflake. Data exchanges are one level above the direct share that we just talked about. In the direct share environment, I have chosen to share data from the DOJ, my department, over to the Department of Transportation. I did that in a one-to-one way. In a data exchange, it's like having a similar thing, but now you're publishing those data sets out to a very small, closed-off community. So maybe Department of Justice, Department of Transportation, and Department of Homeland Security all have one giant ecosystem inside of your state. Each of those agencies can contribute data sets, and then all of the consumers can choose to subscribe to those data sets to include them in their systems. And when I say include, I really mean include. You could take a data set that is subscribed to and do joins with that data and your own data. Going back to the COVID-19 data set, we had a lot of customers out in the Snowflake ecosystem that chose to look at their HR records to see where their employees were living, and then look at the COVID-19 data set from Johns Hopkins University that was published to combine that data together to give a risk assessment and profile for each of their employees. This could be done also at the state and local government, the risk factor for bus runs, for example, or changing the sanitation and hygiene routes for metro stations, for train stations, for bus stations, et cetera, et cetera. But it comes from having somebody else's data become your source of truth. Your own data exchange enables you to create that single source of truth with you and your partner agencies. For example, you can include data sets from our marketplace into your exchange, but also any data from anybody that's inside of your ecosystem. Subscribe to those data sets, do joins across them, and build those data-driven data insights. This enables real-time collaboration in a way that we rarely ever see at state and local government. And I would have said that emphatically about a year ago, but since COVID-19 and the pandemic, that has definitely changed. In this case, we're going to talk a little bit about traffic violation flow, but you can imagine the same thing being true for COVID-19 data sets, or the same thing being true for aggregate health records, for research and development. The list goes on and on. So in this example, the first agency on the left-hand side has a traffic violation table. They publish that data related to traffic violations into the Snowflake Data Exchange. The second agency subscribes to that data. And when they subscribe to that data, what they're really doing is getting a logical pointer to that traffic violation database in the original account. That pointer gives them access to that data without having to store it in their own systems. But it allows them to do joins with that data and their own, to enrich the data that they generate in their own organization with data generated by the experts who are best qualified to create it. In this example, we're also going to bring in a little bit of more data, right? Now we update that data set. So we have new records come in, we update that traffic violations table. And typically, in most environments, the subscriber would then get a notification that would say, you can now download a new version of the data. But Snowflake does this differently. Because the data access is live, the new data is instantly visible inside of that subscriber's account. Because again, they're querying the original data. It's the only way you can get this kind of latency to updates, this kind of real-time statistics generation. This is the only platform that enables that to occur. So the next time that the new agency runs a query, that latest data will be represented, reflecting the latest changes. And in case you're wondering, Snowflake is built on an extremely elastic and extremely scalable platform. We've completely abstracted the storage layer from the compute layer. So having all these other agencies dialing into your data does not slow your data down. We leverage the underlying object storage service inside of that cloud region. For example, in AWS, we use S3. So our storage layer is, in and of itself, a massively parallel processing service that we take advantage of that performance and pass it along to our consumers. So in the data marketplace, we're moving one more layer up. We talked first about the direct data share. I'm going to share data with you. I've chosen to do that. I've picked you out and said you can have access to my data. The second model was moving more to a closed community. I can now publish my data sets, and anybody inside my invite-only community could subscribe to one of those data sets, and I can likewise subscribe to any of theirs. The third model is the data marketplace. This is an app store for data that I talked about earlier. All the data sets can be published for public consumption. This is where California's COVID-19 data set is advertised. This is where data from Zillow on housing prices is listed. Data from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration is listed here on this page. That acronym always kills me. All of these agencies publish their data sets in real time to the Snowflake Data Marketplace so that our consumers can go out and grab these data sets to enrich their own source of truth. All of the data is always live, always ready to query. There's no need to copy. There's no moving. There's no click on the get data and it sits and spins for 48 hours while we copy data into your account. It is instantly ready as soon as you hit get data. And it's the only data marketplace with personalized data sets. These data sets are being contributed to our community by other customers inside the Snowflake ecosystem. And it is globally available even across clouds. If you're in AWS and you publish to our data marketplace, the data set you publish will be available across every region and every cloud service provider that Snowflake is currently deployed into. It's the best way to share data, which is the best way to collaborate across agencies, across governments, and especially across the citizenry. So just a quick example of one grouping of data sets that we might want to put together to come up with a good data-driven decision set is economic recovery after COVID. How do we figure out what those market indicators are? How do we figure out where the case counts are? That's a place where the data marketplace does an exceptional job of bringing those data sets together. For example, we could bring in the COVID-19 epi data from Star Schema. That gives us Johns Hopkins University and World Health Organization data on how the COVID-19 pandemic is progressing. Now, we might be in California, so it would make sense to bring in the California COVID-19 data set. It might also make sense if that's the market that we were focusing on. Either way, we could also bring that data in to get their stance on how things are going there. Next, we might bring in zip code level data on COVID-19 from all across the United States and combine that with AmeriLink Insights. Some of these data sets are considered premium data sets, but they're all available on the marketplace. And by adding them in, we slowly get things like insight and analytics from experts who have looked at much more data than we have and have a ton more experience and have generated a source of truth that we can depend on. Leading indicators for the U.S. economy post-COVID-19, for example, or the reemergence tracker at state and category level for COVID-19. All of these data sets come together in our local environment in real time, live queries, to give us the best possible insights into what's going on in our world. And it's no mystery that we present this stuff out to folks all the time because we believe in the value of it. The numbers, thankfully, have also backed up our beliefs. 84% of customers that were surveyed achieved more of a competitive advantage in their industry or space based on the use of sharing. And I'll go back to the state of California, which has been sharing their COVID-19 data, not just with citizens, but with agencies all over the state. 96% of customers surveyed decreased administration effort through the use of Snowflake. Snowflake is a software as a service product. It's an offering that does not require you to install software on your own virtual machines, set up the encryption, manage the keys, manage indexing of all the tables, manage all that data garbage collection in the back end to make sure your space stays free, provisioning new compute resources or removing them. Snowflake does all of this automatically for you. Software as a service. We provide the service so that you can use the software. And 95% of customers surveyed were able to better manage their organizational risk and decrease the cost of their service. Snowflake, as a SaaS offering, like most other products that are SaaS out there, you only pay for what you use in Snowflake. Your storage cost monthly is calculated based on your average storage used, and your compute is billed by the second. If a warehouse is on and actively doing something, you're billed by the second. When it's off and idle, you don't pay a thing. And that's where a lot of savings comes from with our customers. Forrester put out a wonderful economic impact report of Snowflake using the cloud data platform and what it means to your organization. They found on their independent study a 612% return on investment using Snowflake. They found that customers could roll out Snowflake in half the time of a traditional data warehouse or data platform, and they found a 75% reduction in effort for the IT support staff. Again, the ease of use of creating multiple databases in a single platform, doing joins across them simultaneously without having to do any garbage collection, all of the bottom end, really nitty-gritty detail and admin work, all of those things go away on Snowflake, which only adds to the amazing capabilities of being able to pay for only what you use, which generates savings across the board. When it comes to data sharing in public sector, Snowflake has a very clear advantage. We aim to make it easier for agencies across state and local governments to collaborate not just with citizens or other agencies, but also the federal government to make the world and our country a more beneficial and easier place to live in. Now, I've reached the end of my slides, but I'm happy to entertain any questions that we may have received. And I see that we have a couple. And the first is, what is some general or technical advice you have for people online today to help them succeed with delivering data on the Snowflake data marketplace? That's an awesome question. I will say the first thing is decide what you want to share from the get-go. Coming into a data sharing scenario, I talked a lot about the sort of canned data sets that we have available on the marketplace today. It's important to really approach that saying, what do you want to share? And what data do you specialize in? For example, the Federal Census Bureau is really good at reporting how many people live in each zip code. I would rather use their data than get that data from the Department of Justice or the Department of Transportation. Going to the place that is the expert for that kind of data, and maybe more importantly, if you're going to make an offering, knowing what you're the expert in. What data sets are most important to you, and what do you build, and what value would that add to other agencies? Approach it that way, and then subscribe to Snowflake. Thanks for the question. I see our second is, what are the key security capabilities within Snowflake that give the customers the confidence to control how they share data? Snowflake is built on a full role-based access control model. I'll start with that, and I start with that because we always feel safer when we can very clearly specify who gets access to what. Snowflake is at the end of the day, at the core of itself, still an RDBMS. So the idea of giving grants to certain tables and schemas and databases, all of that still exists inside of Snowflake. So operationally, when you're sharing data or even just presenting data to other users in your ecosystem, Snowflake makes it very simple and direct to understand who gets that data and who has access to what. Under the architecture, under the covers, there's really a complete stack of Snowflake security. For example, we don't own data centers. We live inside of AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, which means we leverage the physical protection that they have in their data centers. AWS has guys with guns, so Snowflake has guys with guns. Our systems are held in locked cages. Systems are then provisioned with encryption at rest and in flight at all times. AES 256 encryption is always used in Snowflake. It's a hierarchical key model using those AES 256 keys, so data is always encrypted at least 2 to 3 times inside of the system. If you want to hack data inside Snowflake, you're going to have to break 3 or 4 AES 256 keys. Your great-great-great-great-great-grandkids might actually get to look at data which is in our proprietary file format, loaded into object storage, and will be completely garbled and useless to you anyway. So there's a ton of security built into the file system. The use of role-based access control, the use of a cloud hardware security module integrated into every single Snowflake account, being able to integrate with SAML 2.0 and OAuth, and finally being able to encrypt all data with TLS 1.2, regardless of client access methods. So there's an entire security stack built into the Snowflake product. Well, folks, we only received 2 questions in this panel, so apparently I did a good job of making things clear on this presentation. I hope everyone benefited from this presentation and enjoyed the information. If you want to get a hold of me after this, it's nicholas.speece@snowflake.com. I'm happy to receive questions, feedback, and give you any answers that I possibly can. A big thank you to Courtney Uriz, the producer for this show, for putting everything together, and of course to you for coming out and joining us today to talk about data sharing at the state and local government level. Visit us at snowflake.com to try a free trial, or go into Snowflake University to start getting certified on the platform. Snowflake is the world's first data platform built natively for the cloud, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you so much, and have a great week.